Welcome to today's Explainer. We are jumping right in to unpack a really fundamental mystery of our universe. It's actually a puzzle you interact with every single day, probably without even realizing it. I mean, we look around and see a world absolutely full of objects, right? Tables, chairs, cars, animals, and, well, ourselves. But if we zoom in close enough, we know everything is basically just a collection of much smaller pieces, like atoms, molecules, and cells. Actually, here's a fun fact to put things into perspective. Mathematically speaking, the human body is only worth about $160 in basic elements. You know, a little carbon, some oxygen, hydrogen, a handful of minerals. But obviously, you are priceless. So the ultimate question we're tackling today is this. Is everything we see, including you and me, simply a collection of tiny, Lego-like building blocks? Or is there something more magical happening when all those blocks finally come together? Let's explore this. So is the whole merely the sum of its parts? Think about the everyday act of taking something apart. When you completely dismantle an object, what exactly happens to it? Does it simply become a messy, disorganized version of what it was? Or does it lose something absolutely fundamental? Throughout this explainer, we're going to run through some brilliant mental exercises to look at the relationship between the tiny pieces that make up our world and the larger entities those pieces end up creating. Honestly, the way you answer this single question fundamentally changes how you view reality, life, and even your own consciousness. Okay, let's dive into this. If I walk up to a simple pile of stones and take away one or, hey, even 10 of them, it's really still just a pile of stones, just a slightly smaller one. Its core identity remains completely intact. But what about something like a complex smartphone? If we separate the battery, the glass screen, the microchips, and literally spread them all out on a table, do you still have a phone? Well, no. It completely loses its identity, its function, and its purpose. It just becomes this useless collection of parts. It's definitely not checking emails or playing music anymore. The specific arrangement really matters. Picture this. You have a few distinct, separate parts enclosed within a larger boundary. Do those internal pieces exist independently, or are their identities entirely dictated by the boundary that encloses them? When parts come together to form a highly specific arrangement, kind of like the components of that smartphone we just talked about, does the whole become a completely new, distinct entity that rules over the parts? Well, this brings us to our first major philosophical school of thought. Section 1. The reductionist worldview, breaking reality down. Reductionism is the philosophical belief that any complex whole can be entirely explained by, and completely reduced down to, its fundamental individual parts. So the crucial takeaway here is that if you want to understand a really complex system, you don't look at the system itself. No, you take it apart. You look at the smallest possible components. A strict reductionist believes there is absolutely zero magic in the whole. The whole is really just a convenient label we slap onto a highly organized collection of parts. If you understand the micro, you automatically understand the macro. We can actually map this out as an inverted pyramid of the sciences. At the very bottom, the foundation, is physics. Physics deals with the most fundamental particles and laws of the universe, and reductionists argue that absolutely everything rests on this. Move up a step and you hit chemistry, which, if you think about it, is really just applied physics, right? It's just how those fundamental particles interact. Then comes biology, which is just incredibly complex chemistry. And finally, at the top, you have psychology and sociology, which are ultimately just complex biology driven by chemical reactions firing off in the brain. In this view, every single thing in the universe can eventually be traced straight downwards and perfectly explained by the foundational laws of physics. If you know the parts, you know the whole. This simple phrase beautifully summarizes the ultimate promise of the reductionist worldview. And it's an incredibly powerful idea. It suggests that the universe is basically this giant, intricate clockwork mechanism. If we can just map out every single gear, every spring, every tiny atom, and exactly how they push against each other, scientists hope we will eventually be able to explain every single mystery in existence. Nothing is beyond our grasp, provided we can just zoom in close enough to observe the foundational parts at play. It's a really comforting, highly structured way to look at reality. Section 2. The puzzle of consciousness and life, where the pyramid cracks. Now, as neat and tidy as that inverted pyramid of reductionism is, there's a massive plot twist in our story where it seems to completely hit a brick wall. Consider a simple wooden table. A reductionist looks at it and says, 4 wooden legs, a flat wooden top, held together by nails. Understanding the parts gives us a 100% complete understanding of the table. But what about a living organism? Say, a rat, or even a human being? If we physically dissect that rat into its component parts, the heart, the lungs, the blood, the bones, we don't just dismantle it, we completely destroy the life that made it a functioning creature. You can't just stitch those exact same parts back together and get a living, breathing creature again. The parts alone just do not seem to account for the living, animated whole. Let's break down the limits of this worldview a bit further. Think about the feeling of a sharp pain, or the deeply subjective experience of seeing the vivid color red. Where exactly do those things exist? If you look at the fundamental particles that make up a human, the atoms, the neurons, the electrical signals, literally none of those individual parts possess pain. None of those single atoms have redness or consciousness. These complex phenomena simply do not exist at the microscopic level. You can map every single atom in a person's entire body, but you are never going to find their memories, their sense of humor, or that intangible essence of them being alive. And this brilliantly illustrates our next problem. How can the brain produce consciousness? I mean, when you really think about it, the brain is ultimately just a wet, physical collection of meat, blood, and chemical electricity. So how does a physical arrangement of flesh create an intangible thought, a deep emotion, or a complex philosophical idea? If reductionism is entirely true, your mind is literally nothing but an illusion created by atoms bumping into each other in the dark. But for many thinkers, that explanation just falls drastically short. The jump from plain physical matter to rich conscious experience is just way too massive to be explained merely by adding up the pieces. Section 3. The Philosophy of Emergentism, a New Level of Reality. Because reductionism struggles so heavily with this puzzle of consciousness and life, an entirely different, deeply fascinating worldview steps into the spotlight. It's called Emergentism. This philosophy argues that at a certain level of complexity, entirely new properties emerge that the individual parts absolutely do not possess. This is a total game changer. Emergentism basically says that the whole is not just a pile of parts. When parts are arranged in a highly specific, complex way, they unlock a completely new level of reality. The whole becomes a brand new entity with its own unique powers and rules that you simply cannot find by looking backward at the base components. New properties emerge that cannot be found at the level of the parts. That quote right there is the core idea. Let's relate this back to our earlier examples to really nail it down. When you perfectly arrange the glass, silicon, and battery of a smartphone, the ability to connect to the internet suddenly emerges. The silicon can't do that on its own. The battery sure can't do that. Only the highly structured whole can do that. Similarly, when biological cells arrange themselves into the unfathomably complex structure of a human brain, consciousness emerges. The parts don't have it, but the whole absolutely does. The specific arrangement unlocks the magic. This perfectly represents the core tension between our two philosophical camps. A bottom-up approach, which is reductionism, states that the parts are the ultimate bosses. They dictate absolutely everything the whole does. But a top-down approach, which is emergentism, flips the script entirely. It argues that once the whole emerges, it actually takes control and dictates the behavior of the parts. Think about it. Your conscious mind, which is the whole, can decide right now to raise your arm, forcing billions of physical atoms, the parts, to move on command. The whole is actively directing the parts. Which brings us to a final, deeply provocative question. Are you just a collection of atoms, or are you something fundamentally greater? Go ahead, look at your own hands right now. Think about the mind you are using at this exact moment to understand my words. Are you merely a walking, talking pile of microscopic Legos, fully explainable by the cold laws of physics? Or are you a magnificent emergent entity, possessing completely unique properties of life and consciousness that make you vastly more than just the sum of your parts? I'm going to leave you to ponder which philosophy rings true for your own existence. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.